For those of you who've just joined, my name is Charlie Bradley Ross, and as well as the amazing Members Club, I am also founder of the ethical textiles company Offset Warehouse, which sells fabrics that are socially or environmentally beneficial. And I am so excited to welcome the incredible ethical fashion journalist and blogger, Bel Jacobs. So hi, Bel, how are you?
Hello, am I on the screen?
You are on screen. Welcome.
Sure, I've never done one of these before. So.
I know, Bel's debut into a live webinar, so I'm feeling very smug that we are the first to do this with Bel. So thank you so much for joining us. And we had a chat a couple of days ago, as I was saying earlier, and it's got me so pumped for today. So I guess the whole point of this being a live is that Bel will be answering all of your questions at the end. So please do put all of your questions into the chat box, and I'll collect them up and do as best as I can to relay them all right at the end. So why don't we kick off and could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yes, I was, for 13 years, I was fashion editor for Metro newspaper, during which time I had some knowledge of ethical fashion, but it just wasn't the movement that it was today. I included, can I just shut the door? I'm so sorry.
Oh no, go for it. Welcome to live.
Exactly. Yeah, and so while I was at Metro, I was writing as much as I could about ethical fashion, but it wasn't the issue it was today, and the offerings were very basic. I think this is the time when ethical fashion was associated with this raw goat's hair look, very, very bland and basic. But I did include it whenever I could, because I felt that I had this amazing platform in Metro where, you have literally a captive audience on the tube. I think the turning point must have been Rana Plaza, as it was for everyone. That 2013, I imagine everyone that's logged on here today knows about Rana Plaza. It was a time when I think it must have made every fashion journalist stop and think, exactly what are we doing here, and who is making our clothes? So, of course, Fashion Revolution was born out of Rana Plaza, and that was their question, and that is still their question, this incredibly powerful hashtag, who made my clothes? Since then, I've got so much more involved that I will only cover ethical fashion. I think it's such an important issue. Even just today or yesterday, they had the Environmental Audit Committee, the largest select committee hearing, I think, in their history. And so many points were covered. It's a massively important issue.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, the Offset Warehouse team were there, so I can confirm it was a record-breaking number of people that were there. So actually, what I'd love to ask you about, before we kind of dive into the kind of sustainability side, is that you've interviewed some amazing people like Vivienne Westwood, Karl Lagerfeld, Isabella Blow, and I could just go on and on. So could you tell us maybe about some of your favorite interviews?
That's a brilliant question, actually. Vivienne Westwood was an interesting one. It was quite a long time ago. I think I must have been 2 years into my job, so I was still quite fresh and new. I met her in Paris. I went to her Paris show. And she's this phenomenal force of nature. I could tell that she was someone who doesn't suffer fools gladly, incredibly passionate about her issues. And I remember I had 20 minutes with her, and I asked her a question at the beginning of that 20 minutes. And she took me on this wild journey in her answer. I literally didn't get another word in edgeways. She took me on this wild journey that covered the environment, poetry, social justice, everything. It was so far off my question, I'd almost forgotten what my question was. And then I remembered right at the end of the 20 minutes, she actually answered the question spot on. And I got an insight into the complexity of the way this woman thought. I almost couldn't believe this journey that she'd taken me on. And she was a remarkable character. Karl Lagerfeld was the atmosphere around that man is incredible, and the people around him are incredible. We were on the rooftop of it'll come to me after I finish this major art gallery in Paris. Everyone was waiting for him. He still wasn't there. And then suddenly everyone just went still. And that was when Karl Lagerfeld arrived. And he, wherever he goes, he's surrounded by a cohort of the most remarkably good-looking people, all dressed slightly like him. I mean, it is quite an intimidating event. And I was given 5 minutes with him. We were all, the journalists were all lined up, and you step onto his little, he's in a sectioned off area. And again, what a remarkable man, very, very intelligent. My twist on the interview was not to talk to him about fashion at all. I actually asked him about books. He's an incredible reader. He was, I think it was just the whole atmosphere, though, all these beautiful people in black and white just staring at you as you interview Karl Lagerfeld. I think I almost passed out with nerves. I think Charlotte Gainsbourg was, I mean, you know, it was just very, very glamorous in French. And then the other interesting one was Kate Moss. Now, I interviewed her when she was promoting a L'Oreal range. It wasn't one-to-one, it was at a table. But I remember thinking, you know, you go in with an idea of Kate Moss as, you know, this incredibly vibrant, sociable, almost crazy person. Like some of the things that she's experienced in her life have been pretty insane. And yet in person, she's so shy. I mean, even the PRs were like going, she is not one that's comfortable with a lot of attention focused on her. And actually to sit at the head of a table with 20 journalists talking to her about makeup is not something that she enjoys at all. So I found that really, really interesting. I think the last one I've got to mention is Valentino, who he's so charismatic and flirty. And I know he's been with the same male partner for something like 30 years, but you just feel so bedazzled as a woman by his presence. So those are the four that really stick out, just because they were quite surprising in different ways, and they're never what you expect them to be. So I think that's what's really interesting, is that there's the image that is presented to the world, and then there's the reality. And I think now I very much hold that. You know, I always remember that there is a public face and a private face, and they're not always the same. In fact, very rarely.
Yeah, amazing. Wow. That just sounds like another world, really, doesn't it? I was going to ask, actually, how much do you think a brand founder is kind of reliant on that ability to be charismatic? Or do you think you can be kind of like a normal person running a business?
Okay, I'm going to think about this in terms of sustainability, really. Mm-hmm. Today, more and more, the founders of sustainable brands are finding themselves having to do what you're doing, what I'm doing, what they're speaking about their processes and about their aims. I find that very interesting. I think the necessity to communicate what you learn as a sustainable brand is so hungered for now. I remember talking to Elvis Cressy Westling from Elvis and Cressy. And they've been working on they take leather scraps and they turn them into these amazing handbags. And they've been working with fire hose first, and now it's leather scraps. And when I spoke to her about 3 months ago, she said they'd made a decision now to take their learning out, to be more proactive in communications. And now when I read her Twitter feed, she's out and about all the time. So I think there is a part of me that says, if you're running a sustainable brand, learn to communicate effectively, because what you have to say is valuable. You know, the processes that you go through to create a sustainable brand they're complex, they're interesting, and they're useful for other brands who want to start up as well. Obviously, if you're desperately shy, this isn't a bit, you know, don't force yourself to do something you absolutely can't do, because you'll just be watching videos of yourself and go, oh my God, oh my God, do you know what I mean? It can be really excruciating. But I think the drive and the passion to direct the debate in sustainability helps some people communicate. You know, no matter how shy you were, if you feel that you have something and you will have something to contribute to the argument around sustainability, you will find your voice to communicate that.
Wow, amazing. Okay, fab. So, what I think would be super useful is something that we were chatting about before, which is actually at Metro, you didn't have editorial control exactly. So, I think it would be really useful to maybe go through the kind of hierarchy. So, how does it work? You know, who should a brand be contacting about editorial pieces or, you know, styling pieces? How does it work?
Mm. So I've never worked on a mainstream paper, but let me tell you what I do know. When you say I didn't have editorial control, I didn't have the editor telling me what I needed to cover.
Yeah,
Most,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So the impression I'm getting, and editors have told me, is that they are required. You know, the editor will come to them and say, "We've got advertising from this brand. We have to include this product." So I never had to do that except for 2 or 3 promotional editorial things. I would still always, though, if you have enough money, can I just say that I don't think a lot of sustainable brands do have that kind of money to sort of pay for huge shoots. So I think by nature, sustainable brands tend to be quite small and neat. So in that instance, I would always contact the fashion editor first, or the deputy fashion editor, or the fashion assistant, and go in that route.
Okay, brilliant. Easy. Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a big one. Diving into your views on sustainability in fashion. This is a big topic. So I maybe what would be a good way to do this is to talk about ethical fashion as if somebody is new to the concept. Maybe it's something that hasn't been, you know, in their realm before, but they're a brand, fashion brand. How would you define sustainable fashion?
Sustainable fashion is fashion that doesn't hurt people, planet, and animals. I mean, that's a really shorthand way of saying it, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I have met people who haven't encountered sustainable fashion. And I talk about this a lot at the moment because it didn't happen so long ago. But I went to a dinner party of educated, interesting, engaged people, me working in one case in fashion, who had no idea of the issues. And I was really, really stunned. Because it's so much part of my everyday, it is my everyday, that I think we forget how many people out there are not thinking about these issues. I don't know how this is possible because for me, it's everywhere. I mean, but there are people out there, so for whom this is a new thing to think about.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess in terms of the issues, what would you say are the kind of biggest issues in the industry at the moment?
The big one is ethics, I think, how people are being paid overseas for producing cheap fashion. Again, that's the issue that Rana Plaza highlighted. When I talk about Rana Plaza, I think about ordinary people in Bangladesh going to work, and the Rana Plaza workers turned up at the doorstep of their building knowing that the building was unstable, trying not to go in, but being told that if they don't go in, they were going to lose their jobs that they could not afford to lose, going in anyway, and within an hour, dying. And making clothes for well-known high street brands. And it really haunts me to think that some of these people make clothes that you and I, or people who buy high street fashion, and wearing 2 or 3 months down the line. It just seems to me such a strikingly grotesque turn of affairs. I think it wasn't long after that I left Metro, because when I was writing on Metro, I had to cover all brands. You know, I had to cover, you know, if I covered things that were too expensive, readers would write in and say, the stuff is too expensive, we want the cheaper stuff. So I'd have to slip in Primark and Topshop and all the rest of it. I think it became unfeasible for me to continue thinking what I was thinking and knowing what I was knowing. And I couldn't do that job now without a bit of a stab on the conscience. So obviously people up top, environment. badly made fashion is terrible for the environment. We're talking about all the dyes that cotton, which is made in a massive, which appears in a massive percentage of our clothing, is incredibly thirsty crop, requires a lot of pesticides. If you look at the statistics, they are quite astonishing how much of the world's pesticides go into growing cotton. They're often grown in very poor countries where people are not able to take care of themselves properly when they're spraying the crops. You've got the whole instance of genetically modified crops and the way that Monsanto has been controlling Roundup. It's Roundup, isn't it? The pesticide that they spray on cotton crops in India. It's such a complex issue. But it has led potentially really to suicides amongst farmers who are unable to keep up with the costs of buying genetically modified seeds. You've got the runoffs of pollution when you dye clothing. I mean, the environmental toll is absolutely massive. There's a much quoted figure that fashion is the second most polluting industry of all. People debate that and they say, oh, it's the third or the fourth. For me, that's tinkering around the edges. We know that it's massively polluting. And then when you see what's in the high street, these poor quality clothing, badly designed clothing that isn't made to last, clothing literally created with the blood, sweat and tears of people thousands of miles away. It's really, again, quite grotesque. I like that word. It seems to resonate perfectly with this situation. The other one for me personally also is animal welfare. We kill 1 billion animals a year for leather. I think it was 100 million for fur. And every one of those deaths is quite a horrendous death. I had to host a panel talk about a film made in 2010 called My Fancy High Heels, which was about the Chinese leather industry. And the Chinese have no regard for animal life. So it was a really traumatic film with an immense amount of suffering. And I remember lights came up and everyone was white. And I turned around to my co-panelists and they were white. And I asked this lovely woman on the panel, how did that strike? And she basically couldn't answer. So that's the reality of our leather. And yet leather is, you know, I went back home and I opened my cupboard and I looked at this sea of what I now saw as cow skin. So animal welfare for me is also a big one. I have a real issue with that on a, to put it mildly. So on every level, fast fashion or badly made fashion or conventional fashion is killing the planet. And I think of all the ways for the planet to go, this isn't the one. You know, I said to someone, we're not making dialysis machines here. We're making disposable, ridiculous items that people are not treating with any kind of care. It's a really desperately frightening situation, which is why the Environmental Audit Committee gave me a lot of hope. But the other thing that I will say is that we are working against massive structures who have nothing but money to profit to gain from maintaining the status quo of fast fashion. And, you know, that's both incredibly depressing and incredibly inspiring, you know, because if you are a sustainable brand and you hold this knowledge, you know that you are doing the right thing, you know, in this life, in this world. But yeah, it's such a complex area, as you perfectly well know. Yeah.
Well, yes, that's right. And actually, I was about to say, we're so lucky to have somebody like you who is so educated and such an advocate for this area, and also, you know, with just an amazing position to be in, that you can eloquently speak about this and put this together. So actually, I can see we're getting lots of questions now, and everyone's hankering to like kind of get onto the pitching side of things. But I kind of want to turn it around first and ask you a bit about journalists that aren't covering it yet, that aren't covering sustainable fashion. What can we do to encourage them to start covering this?
So I talked about a journalist, didn't I, who'd been resolutely not really writing about it. I mean, there are quite a few major editors who are not tackling this. I do believe that because the conversation is broadening and deepening, that they will be in a position where they find it impossible to not tackle this in their pages. And the journalist that I had in my mind was, you know, I'm not going to name her because she's a very wonderful person. But for me, it has taken her a remarkable amount of time to finally go, this is an issue that I write about in the paper. It does bring me back to pitching, though, which is actually quite a handy link. The product has to speak first. And when we were going to get on to pitching, and I actually asked Tamsin Blanchard, who was fashion editor for The Telegraph and now is a fantastic voice. I mean, she really is. Yeah. She works intimately with Fashion Revolution. And I asked her, what are your tips? And her first tip was, hooray, the same as my tip. Your product has to be fantastic. You have to have a product that speaks well and is an advocate for these issues. So I would say rely on the broadening of knowledge. That editor will change, and then give them a wonderful product to work with. And then when you've given them this wonderful product to work with, you can then mention the sustainability angles. It is a case-by-case basis, because some people are more open than others. Some people are actually profoundly resistant, though I find that difficult to believe that they're still out there, but they probably are. Some people are emerging and they're turning and they're starting to realize the importance of this. Some people are with you already. But the product is key. And actually, I wanted to just quote, there's something called the Trust Conference taking place today. And there's a quote here from James Bartle, who is the founder of Outland Denim. Outland Denim's getting a lot of press because Meghan Markle wore it when she was away recently. And he said, product is everything. Without good product, we will never be a sustainable brand. We will be a charity. But he also said every brand must stand for something, which is fantastic as well.
So true. Okay, so what I'm going to do is jump into one of the questions, because it's actually basically the same as what I was about to ask you. So New Dress Code has asked, what is Bel's honest perspective on small brands approaching her to pitch an idea for an article about them? What would make her decide to report on a particular brand?
I mean, I'm one of the open door people. The moment someone says, I'm working with sustainability, I'm like, oh yeah, that's great. Tell me more. Again, beautiful product, but again, wonderful imagery. So I'm being very, very straightforward here. If you are pitching to a publication, that publication will need great imagery from you. It just makes their lives so much easier if they don't have to shoot it themselves. What else? I want to, because this is such an emerging issue, there's this issue of greenwashing. So I think I will really start to ask questions about the journey that the founder has gone on. It's another of my points with pitching. Know your story. The story is the emotional. I think you did you had a webinar on this, didn't you? The story is really key. How did you get to the position as the founder? How did you get to the position where this was even important to you? You know, why has it become so important to you to create this brand? Who are you working with? Often sustainable brands will work with really interesting, creative craftsmen, almost women's cooperatives in Peru, or knitters in the Hebrides. So the story is really key for me. It's not enough for me to see a brand going, I'm a really sustainable brand, here's some product. I want to know much, much more about the journey, and then build an emotional connection with that journey. Who are you? What's your journey? That's fantastic. But those were probably the three main points that would make me want to cover a brand. Recently, I got pitched a brand, young, just the kind of person I really wanted to try and support. And the imagery was just a bit off, and I thought, well, I can't use the imagery, so how am I going to do this? And then I looked carefully at the product, and the product wasn't quite finished enough. It felt like if it was going to be an ambassador for sustainable fashion, it wasn't quite polished enough. I think if you are going to be an advocate, if you are going to be a brand that promotes themselves as sustainability, there's almost more pressure on you to be beautifully produced.
Okay, brilliant. And in terms of people sending you imagery, what kind of shots do you want to see?
Interesting. Okay. So what I want to see may be different from what another fashion editor wants to see. And I was really thinking about this. I would say, do not do it yourself. So do not, the times when you can hold up a camera and take a picture and then apply a filter, I think they're a little bit over. To compete professionally, try and get a professional crew on board. Get a great stylist and a good photographer, fantastic lighting. I know it's going to cost, but I think it's a worthwhile cost. It may help if you don't try and follow the seasonal approach. So don't feel beholden to do, 4 shoots a year. Maybe bring it down to 2 and use those consistently. Get as many shots as you can out of one shoot. Look for visual language. Look at ads by the big brands who have an infinite amount of money, and see what you like from them in order to communicate your value. So if you are a brand that is quite streetwear, go to some of your favorite mainstream streetwear brands and see how they're communicating their images. I think it's about adopting the language of the mainstream to sell the sustainable product, almost. That sounds soul destroying. The word mainstream destroys my soul, but there are a lot of iterations of that, and of course bring your own personality into it as well. I mean, individualism and individuality are very, very key in this debate, but see if you can present it in a way that a mainstream publication will recognize as stylish, as with something to say, as powerful. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. And so what would you say are your top maybe do's and don'ts? Are there things, especially things that really kind of would get on your nerves? Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So pitching is really difficult, and it was really hard at Metro because I think at one point I was getting 1,000 emails a day. Oh, so I wasn't reading them. Yeah, it was just too much. And I remember at one point I just thought, I'm still not very keen on Kim Kardashian. So any press release that had the word Kim Kardashian in it, I just deleted it immediately.
That's a good tip.
Yeah, good tip. I also never picked up my phone. So I was notoriously difficult to get to because I was working under a lot of pressure. And I think a lot of journalists are working under, despite how much we want fashion to slow down, it's actually speeding up. And the fashion editors are at the forefront of this, and they're getting phone calls and emails like you wouldn't believe. I was deluged with free product. I mean, I can't tell you how much. And if I'd been working on a glossy paper, I imagine it would have been twice as much. People don't send you one lipstick from a lipstick range, they send you the whole range. I was pouring makeup into boxes. Having said all of that, practically, I would send a single email, and then I'd wait 2 weeks and I'd send it again. And then I'd wait 2 weeks and I'd send it again. And you're sending it in full knowledge that these people are under a massive amount of pressure, but you've got a short, succinct press release, you've got a fantastically powerful image, and then in the small print, depressing as this may be, you've got your sustainable story. But I've met brands even now who say lots of journalists don't care about the sustainable story. Bear that in mind. I think it's important to include it for those editors who are into it. If you ever meet an editor, again, it's about recognizing the pressure that they're under. I've sat at a dinner party with all sorts of interesting people, and the fashion editors were in a clump and they weren't really communicating with anyone else. I mean, they're tired of being pitched to. It's a very stressful job in that respect. So all I can say is just keep going. Don't expect very much for the first 2 or 3 emails. Don't get annoying. So that's why I'm saying once every 10 days, 2 weeks, maybe. The emails I did open were from PRs that I had somehow learned to respect and like, that I'd bumped into, and I realized that they weren't just all about the sell, sell, sell. There are people even now, actually, I can think of one woman who, she doesn't even really represent sustainable designers. She represents independent designers, so they all work in a very small scale. But I so rely on her aesthetic. I so trust her aesthetic. Her products are beautiful, and they're rare, and they're unique. And so I always have an open mind when I see her name come up. There's another man I know, male PR, who works with so much integrity, who has a lovely range of clients, including Oxfam, so he'll know who he is now. And I trust him massively, really, to not hard sell me, to try and get me into to shows when they're relevant, to give me everything I need, but to work in quite a sort of courteous way. It's quite difficult. Sometimes you just want to grab a fashion editor and go, oh my God, just, here is the product. But they're under a lot of stress. I was under so much stress. Yeah, I was very snappy on the phone when I did pick it up. And now I'm much more relaxed.
Okay, amazing. Well, actually, you've touched on a question that I saw and now I can't find it. Oh, hang on. Oh, yes. I wanted to ask, what are the do's and don'ts as a fashion PR, and what makes a good fashion public relations agent? So I guess the sort of things that you were just talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a lot of those things. Good fashion PR. Do you know what? I think just being really genuine. The PRs that I like, and it's going to be different for every fashion journalist, but the PRs I like aren't bullshitting me. Sorry. They just seem like really nice people. And I feel that I can turn around to them and say, look, that brand just does nothing for me, and they won't be offended, and they'll step back, and the do's and don'ts. That's basically it. I think be courteous and nice.
Yeah, well, fab. And actually, Fiona adds on to that. Would you recommend that brands use professional PRs, or can they do it themselves?
If you did it yourself, you will be spending between 60 and 80% of your day doing that. So be ready. I remember I did talk to a young couple of designers who did very well in menswear for a while. I don't know where they are actually, but they said they spend so much time in marketing. And I think they were saying we design for 10 to 20% of the time, and the rest of it is marketing. So if you can afford a fashion PR, do. I would interview really carefully. I'd even consider avoiding the really, really big ones for whom you will be a tiny fish in a very big ocean, and go to the emerging ethical PR companies. I can't think of their names off the top of my head, but there are 3 or 4 coming that will only promote sustainable brands, and who will try and work as ethically as possible. Maybe get into conversations with them. But if you do it yourself, you're getting into the world of MailChimp, mailings, follow-ups. Charlie, are you still there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Oh, great. Okay, because my screen went onto screensaver, so I was suddenly getting pictures of...
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, she's turned to a mountain. It's a lot of work, yeah. So if you can go down that route, I would. But choose wisely, because I've also heard a lot of horror stories with people going, I'm paying £500 a month or whatever. I can't remember what the figure was, and I'm getting nothing. I'm getting a tiny little snippet in a local newspaper. If you're finding that, you need to change agencies.
Okay, great. Good tip. I kind of have just a couple more questions before we round up and I throw it open. So anybody who's got any questions, get them into the chat box now. So I was going to ask if you had any brands that spring to mind as people who really do kind of press well, sustainable brands.
Yeah. I really like Elvis and Cressy. She's very, Cressy particularly, is very, very proactive. There's a little brand called Gung Ho. She does beach cleans. I mean, she's very busy. And I do think as a sustainable brand, it's great when you can get involved in other areas of sustainability. Something that you and I talked about is once you start in fashion, you start to see all the other issues going on in the world. So to be able to connect up with those other issues as well is always good. Who else does... Those will probably be the two main ones. If I can think of anything else, anyone else, I will. I know brands, sustainable brands, who don't do publicity very well, and they've got stunning product, and you tweet about them and they don't retweet. So it's like a drop in a kind of, it's like, who am I communicating to here? And that sounds so basic, but it is actually quite key. Yeah. So, that is the other thing about press, is that social media is such a powerful tool, isn't it? So even if you want to do your own press and you spend all your time on social media, you can create a lot of buzz there. I mean, masses, really.
Oh, that's actually a super top tip there. Make sure you retweet those tweets that come through. Yes.
I mean, but even as a journalist now, I mean, I spend a lot of time. I create product, which is my articles. And then I spend a lot of time crafting the Instagram post, and then the Twitter, and then the Facebook, and making sure that you tag the right people is quite boring, but it's actually really necessary. Fiddly.
Yes. Okay. So before we open up to Q&As, I really wanted to mention some of the other fabulous events and movements that you're part of. So I would love to mention Extinction Rebellion first, and then maybe the T-shirts if we've got time.
Yeah. Okay. So as I said, I started off in sustainable fashion. I'm now pretty much involved in, well, I'm concerned about every area of the sustainable landscape. You can't not be, I think. When you hear that we have 12 years to turn this sort of this target, 1.5 target, we're not going to hit that. In fact, some people are now saying that temperature rises could go up by as much as 9 degrees Celsius. So we're talking about a planetary future that is rocky. I really don't want to depress people, but I also want to wake people up to the reality of what's happening. You know, I'm a mum, and I don't know what my daughter's world is going to be like. We're talking about, when you talk about unstable weather, you're not just talking about warm summers and the odd really stormy shower. You're talking about food not being able to grow properly because it doesn't know whether it's coming or going. You're talking about ice caps in the Arctic melting and all that carbon dioxide being released. It's quite frightening. So I joined up with this movement called Extinction Rebellion. I can't say how it's going to develop, but for now it is a movement of civil disobedience, where they want the government to take note of what's happening to the climate, which the government, I mean, in the last budget, the government didn't even mention climate change. And we've got Donald Trump now, who thinks it's all a big joke. And we've got in Brazil, caretaker of the rainforest. We've got Bolsonaro, a new president who's been elected, who considers rainforest to be within the remit of agricultural land, so is ready to develop the rainforest for profit. So all of these things happening, Extinction Rebellion has set forward this motion of civil disobedience. So I'm not going. You can put yourself down as arrestable. I'm not going to do that because I need to get home to cook dinner for my little one. But they are willing to be arrested, really, for to try and gain momentum and change. And these are ordinary people out there gluing themselves to the doors of relevant government departments. I also run another website called How Now Magazine, where I try and cover some of these issues in interesting ways. It's not really a consumer platform. I think there are a lot of platforms out there of how to consume more ethically. This is more an information, what's happening in the world right now in terms of plastics and climate change, and animal welfare as a channel. Animals are so important to me. I've launched a t-shirt range, which is really in its infancy, which is supposed to be raising funds for the David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust, which rescues and rehabilitates baby orphan elephants. As anyone who reads a newspaper will know, the elephants are being literally gunned down in their thousands. There's a chance that the species will be extinct in the world in our lifetime. Factor in the fact that these are creatures that are so magnificent and intelligent and special. They are, for me, they're the jewels of the planet, along with many other species, I have to say. I find it difficult to encompass what's happening to them and the forces working against them. So I launched this t-shirt range. Who knows where this will go? If anyone is an illustrator who cares about animals, please get in touch with me. I need more illustrations. I want a lot of designs, a lot of t-shirts, and a lot of charities for this. We can only do what we can do, each of us. But you can see from what I've talked about is how far I've come from just sustainable fashion, because you can't help it. You know, the moment you hear about pollution, you realize that fashion is not the only polluter. You know, we've got the automobile industries, you've got the oil industries, you've got the petrochemical industries, you know, side by side with fashion as forces that need to be looked at and held to account.
Okay, amazing.
How it's growing there.
Yeah, powerful. Okay, so questions from the audience. And actually, another great question from New Dress Code. Do you prefer to receive a full media kit in the initial email, or is it better to start with an elevator pitch?
An elevator pitch, you mean a very short summary?
Yeah.
I'd start with a short summary, definitely. And then you can, once you've started the conversation going, you can bring in other elements. But when I was working at Metro, I didn't have more time. I didn't have time to read more than 2 or 3 lines from each email. And it was like literally, no, delete, no, delete. It was, yeah, intense. And all the other editors working on different subject areas were the same.
Oh, wow. So really in the first few sentences.
Yeah. It was fast. You had to move fast, yeah.
Okay, amazing. I'm slightly nervous to ask this question, actually. So let's see how we go. Is sustainability the next subculture?
Do you know what? Someone else at a talk that I gave said to me, how do we make sure that sustainability isn't just a trend? And I said to her, the environment will take care of that. Because I don't think the summers are going to cool down anytime soon. I think we're going to go, I think the conversation will, I think the news reports will come out. I think the weather will start to change and turn. I think we're going to be looking at the effects of global warming. And as long as those effects occur, I think more and more people will start to realize this isn't going to go away. This isn't a trend. This is our new reality. One of the women who glued themselves to the door of the government department is a farmer, and her daughter. She was a 48-year-old farmer from the West Country, and she was going, I've seen my crops change. You know, I've seen how, if you go into the country, oh gosh, there's a whole tranche of young naturalists who are going out and they're saying, we're not seeing hedgehogs, we're not seeing butterflies, we're not seeing birds like we used to. The landscape is changing in front of our eyes, and we can't pretend it's not happening. Some people will still try, I know, you know, but the conversation is there. Please don't think that it's going to go away and that everything is going to be, I'm so sorry to sound depressing, but I'm very freaked out personally. So yeah, so I'm communicating that to you. Also find time to have fun. Sorry.
I love it.
But it's really key. So sorry, Charlie, but
great.
It's really key, because the stronger you are emotionally, having rested and nurtured yourself and taken care of yourself, the better able you will be to fight these things. You know, so do not feel guilty if you go to a spa and have a facial, because you actually need this to empower yourself to keep fighting. You know, I've had this conversation. I had this conversation today actually with an underground animal photographer, and she's seen really horrendous things, and she has found ways to take care of herself and not to feel guilty about it. You know, it's okay to be happy.
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. Actually, a side note, I do a lecture about sustainable fashion and ethical fashion, and it is very, very difficult and depressing. And so halfway through, I hand out sweets. Everybody has sweets, so it's all fine. Yeah. So, okay. Next question. Last 5 minutes.
Yeah.
How would you promote or introduce a fabric that no one in the fashion industry has a clue about?
Oh, I mean, I can't say exactly how, but I will say that the landscape for you to do that in is changing. Innovation is being broadly spoken about as the solution to some of the problems that we're facing now. So when I talked about the leather industry and how awful it was for the cattle, I failed to mention how polluting it is for the earth. So people are developing, and they're coming up with, pineapple leather and apple leather and wood bark leather. So be aware, if you've got a new fabric, this is an exciting, that answers some of these questions. This is an confidence in that product. How to talk about it? Talk about it as a fantastic new solution to some of the problems that we're facing.
Okay, amazing. Well, what a great way to round up. And I think that's all of the questions, I hope. I'm pretty sure I've been through them now, fine-tooth comb, and we've not missed anything. So that's really great. And it's just been so useful. And thank you so much again for your time. Anything finally you want to add in there?
I just want to say keep fighting, because we've got to fight for them. Yeah. Great. Thank you so much.
No, that's been absolutely amazing. And let me just quickly check all of the, fab. So make sure you check your Members Club emails for details on our next event and live Q&A with Lena Lou coming up. Plus, we've got some amazing surprises up our sleeves over the coming few weeks. And also, if you're not a member, then of course you can catch up on the details of any upcoming events in our Green is the New Black meetup group. So I will be posting out all of the links to that in the next few days. So have an amazing week, guys. Thank you so much.